Mira stared at her practice test and sighed. The maths section looked like a battlefield. There was geometry with its sharp angles and strange shapes, algebra with its mysterious letters, and calculus with its endless curves and slopes. She had always preferred stories to sums, novels to numbers, but tomorrow's exam did not care about her preferences. Her teacher had said, "It's not just about getting the right total, it's about showing that you can think logically, step by step." To Mira, it all felt like a giant merger of symbols that refused to make sense. Every equation she wrote seemed to break apart before the end. Some questions looked almost identical, yet one tiny change of sign, from plus to minus, could destroy her answer. Outside, the city lights formed a rough graph against the sky. Lines of windows created a glowing diagram of people still awake. On her desk lay a notebook, a half-empty battery pack for her tablet, and a small digital clock that ticked softly, as if it were counting down the hours until disaster. "I wish numbers could just explain themselves," she muttered. "Or at least be a little kinder." At midnight, Mira's eyes grew heavy. Her head dropped onto the open textbook, and the world melted away. When she opened her eyes again, she was still in a classroom, but not her usual one. The walls were made of blackboards stretching into the distance. Equations floated in the air like glowing white dust. A long table stood in the middle of the room, covered with chalk, rulers, and colorful markers. A soft yellow light came from a strange lamp shaped like a sphere, its surface covered with constellations of tiny dots. "Welcome," said a voice. Mira turned. At the far end of the table stood a tall figure in a coat patterned with triangles and rectangles. His glasses were perfectly round, like circles. When he smiled, his face folded into angles that somehow looked kind instead of sharp. "Who are you?" Mira asked. "I am Professor Axon," he replied. "This is the night classroom. You asked for numbers to explain themselves. They heard you." Professor Axon swept his hand, and part of the wall turned into a huge door made of moving shapes. "Before we talk about algebra or calculus," he said, "you must pass through the gate of geometry." The door reshaped itself into a giant rectangle, then a cube, then a tall cone balancing on its tip. Lines appeared, forming a neat triangle. A bright diagonal cut through it like a sword of light, showing a new angle Mira had never noticed. "Every shape has a story," the professor said. "The width and length of a rectangle, the height of a triangle, the smooth round edge of a circle, all these details tell us something. Even the extent of a sphere's surface, or the sharp point of a cone, is just information about space." Mira reached out and touched the glowing triangle. At her touch, numbers appeared along its sides, changing slightly, shifting decimals and fractions in front of her eyes. "Sometimes," Axon added, "we forget that geometry is simply about understanding where things are and how they fit together. Nothing mystical, only relationships." The gate swung open. Beyond the gate was a laboratory humming with quiet energy. On one side, charts and graphs covered the walls, each line telling a different story. On another side stood a row of glass tubes filled with silver liquid that looked a lot like mercury. A digital thermometer beside them showed a fluctuating scale marked in both Celsius and Fahrenheit. "This is the lab of ratios and rates," said Professor Axon. "Here we compare things." He pointed to a large board. "Suppose we have a mixture where the proportion of water to salt is 10%. That's a ratio, a way of saying part over whole. Change the ratio, and the taste changes. The same happens with effort and time, or practice and progress. The rate at which you learn depends on how you mix these ingredients." Mira watched as the numbers on a nearby screen shifted. "If I study 1 hour a day, I improve a little. If I double it, or even triple it, do I automatically learn 3 times faster?" "Not exactly," Axon chuckled. "Human beings are not that simple, but approximately, More focused time helps. Just remember that balance matters. If you try to quadruple your hours without resting, your brain might protest. He tapped another screen showing a table full of numbers. Every row and column here is a fraction of a bigger picture. The minimum effort you must give, the maximum you can handle, these are all parameters in the equation of your life. Suddenly, the lab lights flickered. Wind began to howl outside the windows, though Mira was certain the classroom had no real outside. On the glowing walls, symbols began to swirl, letters and numbers mixing together like storm clouds. "Ah," said Axon calmly. "Here comes the variable storm." Letters X, Y, and Z spun past Mira's head. Some were paired with numbers, others floated alone. Lines of algebra appeared, expressions inviting her to think, to substitute, to rearrange. "An equation," said the professor over the rising wind, "is simply a statement that two things are identical in value, even if they look different on the surface. When we talk about data, for example, the mean is just one way of describing a typical value. The variables are just placeholders. They can be even or odd, large or small. When you solve an algebraic equation, you are not doing magic. You are just asking, what value makes this statement true? That is a rational question, nothing more." Mira watched as one equation split apart. Numbers moved to the left, variables to the right. The professor began to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, his chalk hands moving so quickly that they left glowing trails in the air. "See," he said, "every operation, plus, minus, times, over, has the same purpose, whether we use it once, twice, or multiple times. We are simply reshaping information until it becomes clear." The storm began to calm. When the air grew still again, Professor Axon led Mira to another corner of the room. Here, instead of straight lines and simple ratios, curves ruled the space. A glowing graph showed a line climbing a hill, then sliding down again. Beside it, another chart displayed a smooth wave, like a gentle sea. "This," he said, "is where calculus lives. It studies change." He drew a tiny dot on the graph. At any given moment, this dot has a position. It also has a speed, and perhaps even acceleration. Calculus asks, how fast is this changing? At what rate? If we zoom in to a very small extent, we can approximate the curve with a straight line. That is the power of calculus, turning the complex into something we can handle. Mira nodded slowly. "So derivatives and integrals are just tools?" "Exactly. When we integrate, we add up many tiny pieces, like slices of an area under a curve. It's a sum of small contributions. When we differentiate, we ask about the instant rate of change. Both are simply ways of understanding motion and growth." On the far table, a small cube rolled next to a cylinder and a cone. Above them, a rotating sphere cast soft shadows on the wall. Everything in the room seemed to be moving just a little, as if the world itself were a matrix of tiny changes happening all at once. Professor Axon led Mira back to the center of the night classroom. The lamp sphere above the table dimmed, then brightened again, as if asking a question. "Now," he said, "let us talk about your exam." Mira winced. "Must we?" "We must," he said gently. "Think of your day as an equation. There is a total amount of energy you can spend. Some of it you have already used, scrolling on your phone, worrying, comparing yourself to others. Some of it is stored, like a hidden dividend waiting to be paid out when you truly need it." He picked up a silver scale from the table and balanced two small weights on one side. "On the other side," he continued, placing more weights carefully, "are sleep, food, breaks, and focused study time. If you overload one side, there will be a remainder of exhaustion left in your body." He walked to a small device that looked like a thermometer plugged into a battery. Numbers glowed on its screen, 3.7 volt, then 3.6. Even a battery has limits, he said. It can only hold so much charge. You are no different. If your mental density of worries becomes too high, you cannot think clearly. So, what should I do? Mira asked. First, he said, write down what truly matters tomorrow. Not the maximum score, but the minimum you must do to feel you have tried honestly. Then remember that every question is just a problem with parameters and variables. Nothing is out to hurt you. The classroom began to fade. The graphs, the tables, the diagrams on the walls grew transparent. Mira felt herself being pulled backwards, away from the glowing sphere, away from the long straight lines of the chalkboards and the circles and triangles that decorated Professor Axon's coat. Before you go, he said, his voice now distant, remember this. Understanding is not about being perfect. It is about staying curious. When you see a fraction, a ratio, a chart, a strange equation, do not panic. Ask simple questions. What does this represent? How do the parts relate? What happens if I change one parameter or adjust one variable? Then proceed step by step. The last thing she saw was the professor tapping the side of his lamp, as if adjusting the width and length of the light it cast, making it just bright enough. Not too much, not too little. Mira woke up with her head still on her textbook. The real clock on her desk showed that only a short time had passed. Her room was quiet. Outside, the city was softer now, its lights no longer a harsh matrix of stress, but a gentle background glow. She sat up, opened her notebook, and began to work through a practice paper. This time, when she met a question about temperature in Fahrenheit, or a problem involving density and ounces of liquid mercury in a glass tube, she smiled. When she saw a graph or a table, a triangle or a diagonal line across a rectangle, she imagined Professor Axon's coat and his calm explanation. By the time she finished, her answers were not perfect. Some were approximations, and she knew that. But they were rational, carefully thought out. She understood the story behind each number, each symbol. Tomorrow's exam still mattered. But now, for the first time, Mira felt as if she were not fighting the questions. She was talking with them. And that, she realized, was the greatest sum of all. The merger of fear and understanding into something new, a quiet confidence that, whatever the result, she had learned how to listen when numbers tried to speak.